The cold clink of my empty jewelry box hitting the worn wooden table still echoes louder in my heart than any words she said to me. Keep the visit short, Mom. Today I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret Rodriguez, and I am 72 years old. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment in the South Bronx, where the radiator clangs like a ghost trying to warm bones that have been cold for too long. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of sirens and car horns blending into what New Yorkers call the symphony of the city. But to me, it sounds like loneliness with a soundtrack. That Tuesday morning in March started like any other. The weak sunlight filtered through my single-bedroom window, casting shadows that danced across the faded floral wallpaper I had put up 15 years ago when I still believed things would get better. The smell of old coffee lingered in my tiny kitchen, mixing with the scent of the lavender soap I kept in a small dish by the sink. My hands, weathered and spotted with age, trembled slightly as I reached for the phone. I had called my daughter Jessica twice that morning. No response. When she finally called back, her voice cut through my hope like a knife through paper. Keep the visit short, Mom. I have a conference call at 3, and David is coming over for dinner. You understand, right? I understood. I understood that my daughter, who I had sacrificed everything for, now lived in a luxury apartment on the Upper East Side that I had bought for her. I understood that she saw my presence as an inconvenience, a reminder of a life she wanted to forget. I understood that the box of jewelry I had sold, piece by precious piece, to make her dreams come true, meant nothing compared to her busy schedule and important friends. But understanding and accepting are two very different things. Let me take you back to the beginning, because every story of sacrifice has roots that run deeper than the pain itself. I came to New York City in 1978 with my husband Roberto and our 2 young children, Jessica and Miguel. Roberto had found work at a factory in Queens, and I cleaned office buildings at night to make ends meet. We lived in a cramped apartment in Washington Heights, where the walls were so thin you could hear every argument, every celebration, every heartbreak of the families around us. I remember the smell of rice and beans cooking in every apartment, the sound of meringue music drifting from open windows, and the feeling that we were all struggling together, all dreaming of something better for our children. Jessica was 8 years old then, with pigtails that bounced when she ran and eyes that sparkled with curiosity about everything around her. Miguel was 6, quiet and thoughtful, always drawing pictures of superheroes and tall buildings. I worked 2 jobs for most of their childhood. During the day, I cleaned houses in the wealthy neighborhoods of Manhattan, scrubbing floors and washing dishes for families who never looked me in the eye. At night, I cleaned offices in Midtown, emptying trash cans and vacuuming carpets while the city sparkled outside floor-to-ceiling windows I could never afford to live behind. Roberto and I argued about money constantly. He wanted to spend what little we saved on a better television or new clothes for himself. I wanted to put every extra dollar into a college fund for the children. You're overreacting, Margaret, he would say, dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. They're just kids. Let them be kids. But I knew better. I had seen what happened to children in our neighborhood who didn't have opportunities. I had seen bright minds fade into disappointment, dreams crumble under the weight of poverty and limited options. I was determined that my children would have a different story. Jessica was brilliant in school, always bringing home report cards covered in A's and glowing comments from teachers. She wanted to study business at Columbia University, and I knew that education was her ticket to a life I could never give her through my own hands. So I worked harder. I picked up weekend jobs cleaning restaurants after they closed. I took in sewing from neighbors who needed alterations done. Every dollar I earned went into that college fund. When Jessica graduated high school as valedictorian, I cried tears of pride and exhaustion. She had been accepted to Columbia with a partial scholarship, but we still needed thousands of dollars for the remaining tuition, room, and board. Roberto looked at the numbers and shook his head. It's too much, Margaret. She can go to community college and transfer later. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my jewelry box. It wasn't much, just a few pieces I had inherited from my mother and grandmother, plus my engagement ring and the gold earrings Roberto had given me for our 10th wedding anniversary. But each piece held memories. stories, love, the pearl necklace my mother had worn to church every Sunday, the silver bracelet my grandmother had brought from Puerto Rico when she was just 18 years old, the emerald ring that had belonged to my great-aunt, a woman who had never married but had loved deeply. I held each piece in my hands, feeling their weight, their history. Then I put them in a small cloth bag and walked to the jewelry store on 181st Street. The man behind the counter, a tired-looking Dominican with kind eyes, examined each piece carefully. He offered me $12,000 for everything. It wasn't enough for all 4 years, but it would cover the first year and give Jessica a chance to prove herself, to earn more scholarships. I sold every piece except one small silver ring that had belonged to my mother. I kept that one, telling myself it was because it had no real value to anyone else. But the truth was, I needed something to hold on to. Some physical reminder of where I came from and who I was, beyond being Jessica's mother. Jessica hugged me when I told her about the money, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Mom. I'll make you proud. I promise I'll pay you back someday." We both knew she wouldn't, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Her happiness was worth more than any jewelry, any inheritance, any security I might have wanted for my old age. She excelled at Columbia, just as I knew she would. She majored in finance and graduated summa cum laude. She got a job at a prestigious investment firm on Wall Street, making more money in her first year than Roberto and I had ever made combined. She moved to a small but expensive apartment in the financial district, then to a larger one in Midtown, then finally to the Upper East Side. With each promotion, each raise, each step up the ladder of success, I felt proud and happy for her. But I also felt something else, something I couldn't quite name at first. It was the growing distance between us, the way our phone calls became shorter and less frequent, the way she seemed embarrassed by my accent, my clothes, my questions about her life. Miguel followed a different path. He became a teacher, married his high school sweetheart, and had 2 beautiful children. He lived in New Jersey now, close enough to visit but far enough away that I saw him maybe once a month. He was a good son, dutiful and respectful, but busy with his own family and his own struggles to make ends meet on a teacher's salary. Roberto died 5 years ago, suddenly and without warning. A heart attack at the factory where he had worked for 27 years. I found myself alone in our apartment, surrounded by 40 years of memories and very little money. Roberto's life insurance paid for the funeral and the immediate bills, but there wasn't much left. Jessica came to the funeral, of course. She wore a beautiful black dress that probably cost more than my rent, and she held my hand during the service. But even then, even in my grief, I could feel her checking her phone, glancing at her watch, eager to get back to her important life. After Roberto died, I started calling Jessica more often, not because I needed money or help with anything specific, but because I was lonely. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. The neighbors I had known for decades were dying or moving away to live with their adult children in Florida or California. The city was changing around me, becoming younger, more expensive, more foreign to an old woman who had scrubbed its floors and raised her children in its shadows. But Jessica was always busy. She had meetings, conferences, business trips. She had David, her boyfriend who worked at another firm, and had never shown any interest in meeting her family. She had a social life filled with gallery openings and charity galas and weekend trips to the Hamptons. "I understand you're busy, mija," I would say, using the endearment that used to make her smile. "But maybe we could have lunch on Sunday? Or maybe you could come see your old mother for just an hour." Her responses grew shorter and more impatient. "I really can't this weekend, Mom. Next month is crazy with the quarterly reports." "Why don't you call Miguel? Or maybe you could make some friends in your building." Friends in my building, as if loneliness was something I could solve by being more social, more outgoing, as if the ache in my chest from missing my daughter was something I could cure by playing dominoes with Mrs. Gonzalez from 4B or gossiping with Mr. Santos about the broken elevator. 2 years after Roberto's death, Jessica called with exciting news. She had been promoted to vice president at her firm. Her salary had doubled. She was moving to an even better apartment. "But here's the thing, Mom," she said, her voice bright with possibility. "I found this amazing place on East 79th Street. but it's expensive. Like, really expensive. It's an investment, though. Property values in that area just keep going up. I congratulated her, feeling proud despite the growing distance between us. You've worked so hard, Jessica. You deserve to live somewhere beautiful. There was a pause, and then she said the words that would change everything between us. The thing is, Mom, I need help with the down payment. It's $200,000, and I've got most of it, but I'm short about $50,000. I know it's a lot, but think of it as an investment in my future. And who knows? Maybe someday when I sell it, I can pay you back with interest. $50,000. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my small apartment, trying to process what she was asking. I had maybe $15,000 in savings, the remnant of Roberto's life insurance after all the funeral expenses and bills. I had Social Security, which barely covered my rent and groceries. I had nothing else except the small silver ring my mother had left me and a few other trinkets that held no monetary value. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked around my apartment, looking at everything with new eyes. The furniture Roberto and I had bought when we first moved to this place. The dishes we had eaten from for decades. The photographs of Jessica and Miguel growing up, getting married, becoming real people with real lives that didn't seem to include much space for their aging mother. I thought about Jessica's request, turning it over in my mind like a stone I was trying to understand. She made more money than I had ever dreamed of. She lived in a world of expensive restaurants and designer clothes and vacation homes. Why did she need my money? Why couldn't she get a loan from her bank, or borrow against her existing assets, or simply wait a little longer to save up the difference? But I knew why. Because asking her mother was easier than asking a bank. Because I had never said no to her before. Because she knew I would sacrifice anything, sell anything, do anything to make her happy. The next morning, I called my sister Carmen, who lived in Miami. Carmen had always been more practical than me, more willing to say hard truths when they needed to be said. I told her about Jessica's request, about my sleepless night, about the growing feeling that something was wrong with this picture. "Margaret," Carmen said in her direct way, "you need to think about this carefully. You're 70 years old. You have no husband, no significant savings, no way to make that kind of money again. What happens if you get sick? What happens if you need care? What happens if Jessica never pays you back?" "I know Jessica," I protested. "She's a good girl. She'll take care of me." Carmen was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that stayed with me for weeks. "Margaret, when was the last time Jessica took care of you? When was the last time she asked how you were feeling, or if you needed anything, or if you were lonely? When was the last time she took care of you without you having to ask first?" I couldn't answer her question because I couldn't remember. Had Jessica ever taken care of me? Even as a child, she had been so focused on her goals, her achievements, her next milestone that she rarely looked back to see who might be struggling to keep up behind her. But she was my daughter. My brilliant, successful daughter who had made all my sacrifices worthwhile. If she needed help, how could I refuse her? I started making phone calls. I called the jewelry stores, the pawn shops, the estate sale companies. I had so little left to sell, but I was determined to find a way. I sold my mother's silver ring, the one I had kept when I sold everything else for Jessica's college tuition. I sold the small television Roberto and I had watched together for 15 years. I sold my winter coat and bought a cheaper one at Goodwill. I sold books, dishes, anything that had any value at all. It wasn't enough. Even after selling everything I could bear to part with, I only had $30,000. I called Jessica and explained the situation, expecting sympathy, understanding, maybe even for her to tell me not to worry about it, that she could find another way. Instead, she sighed with frustration. "Mom, I really need this money. The sellers are getting impatient, and I might lose the apartment if I can't close soon. Can't you take out a loan or something? Use your apartment as collateral?" I made one more phone call, this time to my brother Luis, who lived in Chicago. Luis had done well for himself, owning a small chain of restaurants. He had helped me before when Roberto was sick, and I thought maybe he could help me now. But Luis had his own problems. His youngest son was getting married, and he was already stretched thin paying for the wedding. "I can send you $5,000, Margaret," he said apologetically, but that's all I can manage right now. With Luis's 5,000, plus the 30,000 I had scraped together from selling my possessions, I had $35,000. I was still 15,000 short, and I had nothing left to sell. That's when I remembered the investment account Roberto had set up years ago. It was small, maybe $20,000 in old stocks and bonds that we had never touched. I had always thought of it as our emergency fund, money we would use if one of us got seriously sick, or if we needed significant home repairs. I guess this qualified as an emergency. I liquidated Roberto's investment account, feeling like I was selling pieces of our marriage, our dreams, our security. Combined with everything else, I finally had the $50,000 Jessica needed. I called her with the good news, expecting gratitude, excitement, maybe even tears of joy. Instead, she sounded distracted and businesslike. "Great, Mom. Can you wire it to my account by tomorrow? I need to get the check to the sellers by Friday." That was it. No thank you speech. No acknowledgement of what this money represented, of what I had sacrificed to give it to her. Just instructions for the wire transfer and a quick goodbye because she was running late for a meeting. I went to the bank the next morning and sent my daughter $50,000, wiping out everything I had managed to save and accumulate over 7 decades of life. I walked home slowly, feeling strangely empty, like I had just given away more than money. But I told myself it was worth it. Jessica would be happy in her new apartment. She would be successful and secure, and someday when she was older, she would understand what I had done for her and appreciate it. Maybe she would even invite me to visit more often, to see her beautiful new home and be proud of what we had accomplished together. A month later, Jessica called to tell me she had moved into the apartment. "It's incredible, Mom. You should see the view of Central Park, and the kitchen has marble countertops and stainless steel appliances. There's a doorman and a gym in the building, and the neighborhood is so sophisticated." She didn't invite me to see it. She just described it, like she was sharing a story about someone else's life, something beautiful and distant that I could admire but never touch. "Can I come visit this weekend?" I asked carefully. "I'd love to see your new place." There was a pause, and when Jessica spoke again, her voice had that careful tone she used when she was trying to let me down gently. "This weekend isn't great, Mom. I'm still getting settled, and the place is a mess with boxes everywhere. Maybe in a few weeks when things calm down." A few weeks turned into a few months. Every time I called to ask about visiting, there was a new excuse. She was traveling for work. She was having the apartment painted. She had house guests. She was too busy with a big project at the office. I started to wonder if she was embarrassed by me. Maybe she was worried that her sophisticated neighbors would see her old, poorly dressed mother visiting and realize that she came from humble beginnings. Maybe she was afraid David would meet me and see the gap between her new life and her old one. Have you ever felt invisible in your own child's life? Have you ever wondered if the person you sacrificed everything for even sees you anymore? 8 months after Jessica moved into the apartment I had bought for her, she finally agreed to let me visit. But there were conditions. I could come for 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon. I should dress nicely but not too formally. I shouldn't ask too many questions or expect to stay for dinner because she had plans. "Keep the visit short, Mom," she said when she called to confirm the details. "I have a conference call at 3, and David is coming over for dinner. You understand, right?" I understood that I was being squeezed into my daughter's life like an appointment she was trying to reschedule. But I said yes, because I missed her, because I wanted to see where my $50,000 had gone, because I hoped that once I was there, once she saw my face and remembered who I was, she might remember how to love me again. I spent hours getting ready for that visit. I bought a new dress with money I couldn't afford to spend, something simple but elegant in navy blue that I thought would make me look respectable, worthy of being seen in her fancy building. I practiced what I would say, how I would compliment her apartment without gushing, how I would ask about her life without prying. I wanted to be the perfect mother, the kind who deserved to be invited back. The building on East 79th Street was everything Jessica had described and more. Glass and steel rising toward the sky. A uniformed doorman who looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain. A marble lobby that echoed with the sound of my old shoes on expensive stone. I gave the doorman Jessica's name, and he called upstairs with the tone of someone announcing an unwanted visitor. "She's expecting you," he said finally, handing me a visitor's badge that felt like a mark of shame. Jessica's apartment was on the 15th floor. I rode the elevator up in silence, watching the numbers climb and feeling my nervousness grow with each floor. When the doors opened, Jessica was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed, looking at her watch. She looked beautiful, as always. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her clothes expensive and tasteful. But when she smiled at me, it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Mom," she said, giving me a brief hug that felt more like a gesture than an expression of love. "Come on in. I want to show you around quickly before my call." The apartment was stunning. High ceilings, huge windows overlooking Central Park, furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The kitchen had indeed marble countertops and stainless steel appliances. The living room had cream-colored carpets and abstract art on the walls. Everything was perfect, pristine, expensive. "It's beautiful, Jessica," I said, meaning it. "You must be so happy here." She led me through each room like a tour guide, pointing out features and amenities but never sitting down, never inviting me to relax or feel at home. "This is the guest bedroom," she said, showing me a room that was clearly unused, with white bedding and no personal touches. "And this is my office where I work from home sometimes." I noticed there were no photographs of family anywhere. No pictures of Miguel's children, no wedding photos from friends, no images from her childhood or our family trips when she was young. The apartment was beautiful but sterile, like a hotel suite where someone was staying temporarily. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, but she was already looking at her watch again, counting down the minutes until she could politely ask me to leave. We sat in her living room for exactly 45 minutes. She talked about her work, her recent promotion, her travel schedule. I talked about the weather, my health, the neighbors in my building. Neither of us mentioned the $50,000 that had made this apartment possible. Neither of us talked about Roberto or Miguel's children, or the fact that this was the first time I had seen her in over a year. When she walked me to the door, she kissed my cheek and said it had been nice to see me. She didn't invite me back. She didn't suggest we do this more often. She just said goodbye and closed the door, leaving me standing in the elegant hallway feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. On the subway ride back to the Bronx, I stared at my reflection in the dark window and tried to understand what had just happened. I had given my daughter everything I had, and in return, she had given me 2 hours of polite conversation and a tour of the apartment my money had bought. I had sold my mother's ring, my father's watch, Roberto's investment account, and pieces of my own security to make her dream come true. And she had treated me like a stranger, someone to be managed and dismissed as quickly as possible. That night, I sat in my small apartment and did something I hadn't done since Roberto's funeral. I cried. Not the quiet tears of sadness or frustration, but the deep, body-shaking sobs of someone whose heart is breaking for the first time. But this was just the beginning of my awakening. Over the next few months, I started to see patterns I had been blind to for years. Jessica's calls became even less frequent. When I called her, she was always in a hurry, always on her way to something more important than talking to her mother. When I suggested getting lunch or meeting for coffee, there was always a reason why she couldn't make it. Miguel was different, but not necessarily better. He called more often, visited more regularly, but there was a dutiful quality to his attention that made it clear he saw me as an obligation, not a pleasure. He loved me. I knew that. But he also seemed to expect me to be grateful for whatever time he could spare from his real life with his wife and children. I started paying attention to how my children talked to me and about me. Jessica's impatience when I didn't understand something about her work or her life. Miguel's gentle but firm corrections when I expressed opinions that he thought were outdated or inappropriate. The way both of them seemed embarrassed by my accent, my clothes, my neighborhood, my limited understanding of their sophisticated adult lives. Had I raised children who were ashamed of me? Had I sacrificed so much to give them opportunities that they had lost sight of where they came from and who had made their success possible? I tried talking to my sister Carmen about these feelings, but she was dealing with her own aging parent issues with her husband's mother who had dementia. I tried talking to Mrs. Gonzalez in my building, but she just shrugged and said that's how children were these days. Too busy for their parents until they needed something. But I started to wonder if maybe it didn't have to be this way. Maybe I had taught my children to take me for granted by always being available, always saying yes, always putting their needs ahead of my own. Maybe I had been so focused on being a good mother that I had forgotten to be a whole person deserving of respect and consideration. The realization that changed everything came 6 months after my visit to Jessica's apartment. I was cleaning out some old papers when I found a letter that had been delivered to my apartment by mistake, addressed to someone with a similar name in a different building. I walked over to deliver it personally, and while I was talking to my neighbor, she mentioned that her daughter had helped her buy a beautiful condo in Florida where she spent the winters. "Your daughter bought you a condo?" I asked, surprised. "Oh no," she laughed. "I bought it myself with my retirement savings. But Maria helped me pick it out and negotiate with the seller. She took time off work to fly down there with me and take care of all the paperwork. She said her mom deserved to have somewhere warm and comfortable to relax in her old age." I walked home from that conversation feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. This woman's daughter had helped her buy something for herself, with her own money, for her own happiness. My daughter had asked me to buy something for her, with my money, for her happiness. And I had thought I was being a good mother. That night, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible to me just a year earlier. I was going to stop giving Jessica money, not because I was angry or trying to punish her, but because I was finally beginning to understand that I had been enabling her to treat me badly. Every time I said yes to her requests, every time I put her needs ahead of my own, every time I accepted her excuses for not having time for me, I was teaching her that I didn't value myself enough to expect better treatment. But it would take a crisis for me to find the courage to act on that decision. The crisis came in the form of a phone call on a Tuesday morning in November. I had woken up with chest pains and shortness of breath, symptoms that had been getting worse for several days. I was scared enough to call 911, something I had never done in my life. The paramedics took me to the emergency room at Lincoln Hospital, where I spent 6 hours being tested for everything from heart problems to pneumonia. The tests showed that I was having some heart irregularities, probably caused by stress and poor diet. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough that the doctor recommended I stay overnight for observation and follow up with a cardiologist as soon as possible. I called Jessica from my hospital bed, expecting that she would at least sound concerned, maybe even offer to come see me. But her response was almost businesslike. "Oh, Mom, that's scary. But you're okay now, right? The doctors said it wasn't serious?" "Good. Listen, I'm actually in the middle of this huge presentation for Thursday, and I really can't get away right now. But call me tomorrow and let me know how you're feeling, okay?" I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling of my hospital room, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. My daughter, who I had given everything to, couldn't spare 2 hours to visit her mother in the hospital. She was too busy with a presentation, with work that would still be there whether she came to see me or not. Miguel did better. He drove up from New Jersey that evening and stayed until visiting hours were over. But even with him there, holding my hand and asking the nurses questions about my care, I felt a profound sadness about the state of my relationships with my children. When had I become so unimportant in their lives? When had my health, my happiness, my very existence become secondary to their work schedules and social obligations? I spent that night in the hospital bed thinking about the choices I had made as a mother, the messages I had sent to my children about my own value and worthiness of love. I had taught them that I would always be there, always say yes, always put their needs first, and they had learned the lesson too well. But was it too late to change the dynamic? Was it possible for a 72-year-old woman to start setting boundaries with adult children who had learned to take her for granted? I was about to find out, because the next morning brought a discovery that would force me to confront the truth about my relationship with Jessica in a way I could no longer avoid or rationalize away. I was discharged from the hospital with instructions to follow up with a cardiologist and to reduce stress in my life. The irony of that second instruction wasn't lost on me, considering that my main source of stress was trying to maintain relationships with children who seemed to see me as more of a burden than a blessing. Miguel drove me home from the hospital and helped me get settled back in my apartment. He was kind and attentive, making sure I had groceries and medication, writing down the phone numbers for the cardiologist, and reminding me to call for an appointment. But I could see him checking his phone regularly, and I knew he was anxious to get back to his own family and responsibilities. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment feeling grateful for his care, but also aware of how temporary it was. He would check on me for a few days, maybe call a bit more often for a week or two, but then things would go back to normal. I would be alone again, managing my health and my life without much input or support from my children. That evening, Jessica called. Her voice was bright and chatty, as if nothing had happened. "Hi, Mom. Miguel told me you're home and feeling better. That's great news. Listen, I have something exciting to tell you. David and I are thinking about getting engaged." I tried to muster enthusiasm for her news, but I was still processing the fact that she hadn't asked how I was feeling or whether I needed anything after being hospitalized. Instead, she was immediately shifting the conversation to her own life and her own excitement. "That's wonderful, Jessica," I managed to say. "Have you set a date for the wedding?" "Oh, we're not that far along yet," she laughed. "But we've been talking about it. And David thinks we should probably buy a house in Westchester or Connecticut. Something with more space, maybe room for kids someday. The thing is, houses are so expensive out there, and we'd need a pretty big down payment to get into the kind of neighborhood we want." And there it was. The real reason for her call. Not to check on my health or express concern about my heart problems, but to plant the seed for her next financial request. I felt something shift inside me, a clarity I had never experienced before. This was my daughter, the person I loved more than anyone else in the world, treating me like a bank account rather than a human being. She hadn't visited me in the hospital, hadn't offered to help with my medical expenses or ongoing care, but she was already thinking about how to fund her next major purchase. "I need some time to rest now, Jessica," I said, cutting the conversation short. "We can talk about your plans another time." But over the next few days, as I rested and recovered from my hospital scare, I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation and what it revealed about the nature of our relationship. Jessica saw me as a resource to be tapped when needed, not as a person with my own needs, fears, and limitations. The revelation that would change everything came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Carmen Delgado, who lived in the apartment next to mine, knocked on my door a few days after I came home from the hospital. She was holding a cup of tea and a concerned expression. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind me bothering you, but I heard you were in the hospital and I wanted to check how you're doing." Mrs. Delgado was in her 70s like me, a retired nurse who had moved into the building about 2 years earlier. We were friendly neighbors but not close friends. She was originally from Cuba and had that straightforward way of speaking that I had learned to appreciate in older women who had lived through difficult times. "I'm feeling better, thank you," I told her, inviting her in for coffee. We sat in my small kitchen, and she asked thoughtful questions about my health and my follow-up care. Then she said something that surprised me. "Margaret, I hope this isn't too personal, but I couldn't help noticing that during all the commotion with the ambulance and everything, I didn't see your children until the evening. I know you have a daughter who lives in Manhattan and a son in New Jersey. Were they not able to come right away?" The question was asked gently, without judgment, but it forced me to confront something I had been trying not to think about. Jessica had been 20 minutes away by subway, working at a job where she was senior enough to leave for a family emergency. Yet she hadn't come to the hospital until the next day, and even then only briefly. Jessica was very busy with an important work project, I said, hearing how hollow the excuse sounded when I said it out loud. Mrs. Delgado nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. Work can be very demanding. But you know, when my daughter lives in Orlando heard I was having chest pains, she got on the first flight she could find. She said her job would have to understand that her mother comes first." After Mrs. Delgado left, I sat in my kitchen thinking about the difference between having a job that demands everything from you and choosing to let your job be more important than your family. Jessica wasn't a doctor saving lives or a firefighter responding to emergencies. She was a financial advisor whose presentation could have been postponed or handled by someone else if she had explained that her mother was in the hospital. But she hadn't wanted to postpone it. She had chosen her work over her mother because work felt more important to her than I did. That realization led to another one. If Jessica saw me as less important than a work presentation, what did she think about the $50,000 I had given her for her apartment? Did she see it as a gift from someone who loved her? Or as money she was entitled to because I was her mother and supporting her was my job? I started thinking about all the ways Jessica had asked for money over the years. The car payment when she was in college, the security deposit for her first apartment in the financial district, the loan for graduate school that she had never paid back, the emergency fund when she lost her job for 3 months early in her career. Each time, I had given her what she needed without question, often at the expense of my own financial security. And in all those years, when had Jessica ever offered to help me financially? When had she ever asked if I needed money for medical bills or home repairs, or just to have a little extra cushion for emergencies? The answer was never. In her mind, money flowed in only one direction, our relationship, from me to her. But there was something else bothering me about Jessica's apartment, something I couldn't quite articulate. When I had visited her, something had felt off about the place. It was beautiful and expensive, exactly as she had described, but it also felt temporary somehow, like no one really lived there. After Mrs. Delgado's visit, I found myself thinking more and more about that feeling. Why had there been no personal photographs anywhere in the apartment? Why had the guest bedroom looked completely unused? Why had Jessica given me such a rushed tour, almost like she was afraid I might notice something if I looked too carefully? I decided to do something I had never done before. I was going to investigate. I called Jessica's office and asked to speak with her, pretending I had an important question about Medicare that couldn't wait. When she got on the phone, she sounded annoyed. "Mom, I'm in meetings all afternoon. Can't this wait until tonight? I just need to know your home address for this Medicare form," I said. "They want to verify where you live." She gave me the address on East 79th Street, the apartment I had visited. But then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "But actually, if it's for Medicare, you should probably use David's address in Brooklyn. I've been staying there most nights, and that's where my mail goes." After I hung up the phone, I sat staring at the wall trying to process what she had just told me. She was living with David in Brooklyn, but she had asked me to buy her an apartment in Manhattan. An apartment that she apparently didn't actually live in most of the time. I called information and got the number for the building management company for Jessica's apartment. I pretended to be calling about mail delivery and asked whether the apartment was currently occupied or being sublet. The building manager was helpful and chatty. "Oh, 15F? That's Ms. Rodriguez's place. Nice young lady, though we hardly ever see her. I think she uses it more as an office than a residence. Her boyfriend mentioned that they're thinking about subletting it since she's not there very often." I hung up the phone, feeling like the room was spinning around me. Jessica was subletting the apartment I had bought for her. She was making money from my $50,000 sacrifice, treating it like a real estate investment rather than the home I thought I was helping her create. But there was more. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had learned. I decided to do more investigating, and what I found made me feel sick to my stomach. I looked up real estate records online at the public library, something I had learned to do when Roberto and I were thinking about refinancing our own apartment years ago. Jessica's apartment was listed as owned by a limited liability company called JD Properties LLC. The address for the LLC was care of a law firm in Midtown Manhattan. I called the law firm and asked to speak with someone about JD Properties. After being transferred several times, I reached a paralegal who was willing to talk. JD Properties owns several investment properties in Manhattan, she told me. It's a real estate holding company for tax purposes. The properties are purchased as investments and then rented out or used as short-term furnished rentals. Investment properties. Tax purposes. Short-term furnished rentals. My $50,000 hadn't bought Jessica a home. It had bought her an investment property that she was using to make money. The apartment I thought was her dream home was actually a business venture, a way to generate rental income and tax benefits. But the absolutely devastating part was still to come. I spent the weekend thinking about what I had learned, trying to decide what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to call Jessica immediately and confront her about lying to me. Part of me wanted to pretend I had never found out, to go back to believing that my sacrifice had been for something meaningful. But on Monday morning, Mrs. Delgado knocked on my door again, this time with a concerned expression that immediately put me on alert. "Margaret," she said carefully, "I hope you won't be upset with me, but I think there's something you need to know. My grandson works in real estate in Manhattan, and when I mentioned your daughter's apartment to him, he looked it up for me." She handed me a printed email from her grandson. The subject line read, "Information about 345 East 79th Street, apartment 15F. I read the email with growing horror. According to public records, the apartment had been purchased 18 months ago, not by Jessica, but by JD Properties LLC. The purchase price was listed as $850,000, not the million-plus that Jessica had told me it cost. The apartment was currently listed on several short-term rental websites as a luxury furnished apartment available for weekly or monthly stays. But the worst part was in the last paragraph of the email. Mrs. Delgado's grandson had done some additional research and discovered that JD Properties LLC was owned by Jessica Rodriguez and David Chen, Jessica's boyfriend. They had apparently started the company specifically to buy investment properties in Manhattan, using money from investors to fund the purchases, and then splitting the rental income between them. I was one of the investors. Except, I hadn't known I was an investor. I thought I was a mother helping her daughter buy a home. I sat in my kitchen holding that email and feeling everything I thought I knew about my relationship with Jessica crumble around me. She hadn't just asked me for money. She had lied to me about why she needed it, how much she needed, and what she planned to do with it. She had turned my maternal love and sacrifice into a business transaction, using my money to fund a venture that was making her even wealthier. And I had been so proud of myself for being able to help her. So proud that my daughter trusted me enough to ask for my assistance with such an important purchase. So happy that I had been able to contribute to her success and happiness. I had been played. Completely, thoroughly, expertly played by my own daughter. But even in my hurt and anger, I tried to rationalize her behavior. Maybe she had planned to tell me about the investment angle. Maybe she thought I would be proud that my money was generating income. Maybe this was just a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a conversation. So I called her. "Jessica," I said when she answered the phone, "I need to ask you about something. I found out that your apartment is actually a rental property, not your home. Can you explain that to me?" There was a long pause. Then Jessica sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested I was being difficult and unreasonable. "Mom," she said in her patient voice, "I told you it was an investment. Real estate in Manhattan is always an investment. And yes, David and I rent it out sometimes when we're not using it. It's a great way to generate income and offset the carrying costs. But you told me you needed the money to buy a home," I said. "You said you were moving in there, that it was your dream apartment." "It is a great apartment," she replied. "And I do use it. But it's also smart business to maximize the return on investment. I thought you would understand that." What I understood was that she was lying to me again, even when confronted with evidence of her deception. What I understood was that she had deliberately misled me about her plans because she knew I wouldn't give her $50,000 to fund her real estate business venture. "You lied to me, Jessica," I said quietly. "I didn't lie, Mom. I just didn't explain every detail of the business structure. You wouldn't have understood all the legal and tax implications anyway." The condescension in her voice was like a slap across my face. Not only had she deceived me and used me, but now she was dismissing my intelligence and my right to know what my money was being used for. I hung up on her. For the first time in my life, I hung up on my daughter. I spent the rest of that day walking around my apartment, looking at everything with new eyes. The furniture I had kept when I could have sold it for more money to give to Jessica. The photographs of her graduation, her promotions, her achievements that I had displayed so proudly, the small gifts she had given me over the years, token presents that probably cost less than what I spent on groceries in a week. I felt like I had been living in a fantasy relationship with a daughter who existed only in my imagination. The real Jessica saw me as a convenient source of funding for her ambitions, someone who could be manipulated with stories about dreams and needs and family love. But the part that hurt the most wasn't the money. Although $50,000 represented everything I had managed to save and sacrifice over 70 years of life, the part that hurt the most was the realization that Jessica thought I was stupid enough to believe her lies. naive enough to be manipulated without ever questioning her stories, and unimportant enough that she didn't owe me honesty or respect. That night, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable to me just a week earlier. I was going to take back control of my life and my relationships. I was going to stop being the kind of mother who could be taken advantage of, and I was going to start being the kind of person who demanded to be treated with dignity and respect. But first, I needed to mourn the daughter I thought I had, and the relationship I thought we shared, because both of those things had been illusions, and accepting that truth was the hardest thing I had ever done. The next few weeks were the darkest period of my life since Roberto's death. I felt like I was grieving, not just for the money I had lost, but for the relationship with Jessica that I now understood had never really existed, at least not in the way I had imagined it. I stopped calling her. I didn't return her calls when she left messages asking why I seemed upset. I needed time and space to figure out who I was as a person, not just as Jessica's mother, and what I wanted my life to look like going forward. Mrs. Delgado became my lifeline during this period. She would stop by most evenings with tea or soup, and we would talk about our children, our disappointments, our hopes for better relationships in whatever time we had left. She had her own stories of sacrifice and ingratitude, her own struggles with adult children who seemed to take her for granted. But she also had something I was just beginning to learn: boundaries. Mrs. Delgado loved her children deeply, but she didn't let them walk all over her. When they asked for money, she said no if she couldn't afford it. When they canceled plans with her, she made other plans and didn't sit around waiting for them to reschedule. When they treated her disrespectfully, she called them out on their behavior instead of making excuses for them. "How did you learn to do that?" I asked her one evening. "How did you learn to say no to your children?" She looked at me with those wise eyes that had seen decades of life and love and loss. "Margaret," she said, "I learned that if you don't respect yourself, no one else will respect you either. And I learned that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. It's just enabling." Mrs. Delgado was the one who suggested I might benefit from talking to someone professional about my relationships and my feelings. She gave me the number of a counselor at the community center who specialized in working with older adults dealing with family issues. Dr. Sarah Martinez was in her 50s, bilingual, and had the kind of warm but direct manner that made me feel comfortable talking about things I had never discussed with anyone. Over several sessions, she helped me understand how I had gotten trapped in patterns of giving and sacrificing that were actually harmful to my relationships with my children. "You taught them that your love was conditional on their success," she explained, "and they learned that your worth was conditional on their approval. Neither of those things is healthy or sustainable." She helped me see that by always saying yes, always giving, always putting my children's needs ahead of my own, I had actually taught them to devalue me. Children need to see their parents as whole people with their own needs and boundaries, not just as sources of unconditional support and resources. But more importantly, she helped me understand that it wasn't too late to change these patterns. I could learn to set boundaries, to say no, to demand respectful treatment. It would be difficult, and my children might resist the changes, but it was possible to have healthier relationships even at this stage of our lives. The first boundary I decided to set was financial. I was never again going to give my children money without full disclosure about what it was for and how it would be used. And I was never again going to give money I couldn't afford to lose or that would compromise my own financial security. The second boundary was about time and attention. I was no longer going to accept being squeezed into my children's schedules like an inconvenient appointment. If they wanted to see me, they needed to make real time for me, not just brief visits between more important obligations. The third boundary was about honesty and respect. I was no longer going to accept being lied to, dismissed, or treated like I was too old or stupid to understand complex situations. My children could disagree with me, but they couldn't disrespect me. 3 months after discovering the truth about Jessica's apartment, I was ready to have the conversation I had been avoiding. I called her and asked her to come see me, not for a brief visit between other appointments, but for a real conversation that might take several hours. "I can't do Saturday afternoon," she said immediately. "I have plans with David's family. And Sunday won't work either because we're looking at houses in Westchester." Then pick a time that does work for you, Jessica, I said calmly. But I need to see you within the next week, and I need at least 2 hours of uninterrupted time. This is important. There was something in my tone that must have gotten her attention because she agreed to come by the following Wednesday evening after work. I spent that week preparing for the conversation, writing down the main points I wanted to make, and trying to anticipate how she might respond. Dr. Martinez had helped me practice staying calm and focused, not getting drawn into arguments or emotional manipulation. When Jessica arrived that Wednesday evening, she was already checking her phone and looking at her watch. She gave me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek and sat down on my couch with the air of someone who was doing me a favor. "What's so urgent, Mom?" she asked. "You sounded really serious on the phone." I sat down across from her and took a deep breath. "Jessica, I found out about your apartment. I know it's an investment property that you and David use to generate rental income. I know you lied to me about why you needed the money and what you planned to do with it." Her face went through several expressions: surprise, annoyance, calculation. Finally, she settled on defensive indignation. "Mom, I don't know what you think you found out, but you're making a big deal out of nothing. The apartment is exactly what I told you it was. The fact that we also rent it out sometimes doesn't change that." "Jessica," I said quietly, "I have copies of the public records. I know about JD Properties LLC. I know the apartment was purchased as an investment property from the beginning. I know you and David have been using it as a short-term rental to generate income." She stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to figure out how much I actually knew and how much I was guessing. When she spoke again, her voice had a hard edge I had never heard before. "Fine," she said. "Yes, it's an investment property. Yes, David and I rent it out to help cover the costs. Yes, we make money from it. So what? You gave me that money as a gift, Mom. What I do with it after that is my business." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Even now, even when caught in her deception, she was trying to turn the situation around and make me feel guilty for questioning her actions. "You asked me for $50,000 to help you buy a home," I said carefully. "You told me you needed help with the down payment for your dream apartment, the place where you were going to live and be happy. You let me sell everything I owned, including my mother's ring and your father's investment account, to give you that money." "And you did give it to me," she said, shrugging. "Nobody forced you to. You chose to help me, just like you've always chosen to help me. Don't try to make me feel guilty now because you're having second thoughts." The coldness in her voice, the casual dismissal of my sacrifice, the complete lack of empathy or understanding. It was like looking at a stranger wearing my daughter's face. "Jessica," I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest, "do you love me?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Of course I love you, Mom. You're my mother. Then why do you treat me like someone whose only value is what I can give you?" "I don't," she protested, but without much conviction. "When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you invited me to spend time with you without me having to ask first? When was the last time you offered to help me with anything at all?" She didn't answer, but I could see in her face that she was starting to realize where this conversation was heading. "Jessica," I said, "I love you more than my own life, but I can't continue to have a relationship with you that's based on you taking and me giving. I can't continue to pretend that it's normal for a daughter to lie to her elderly mother in order to get money from her. And I can't continue to accept being treated like I'm not smart enough or important enough to deserve honesty and respect." "Mom," she said, and for the first time since she had arrived, she sounded uncertain. "You're overreacting. All families have complicated money issues. It doesn't mean I don't love you. All families don't have mothers who sell their wedding rings to fund their children's business ventures," I replied. "All families don't have daughters who lie about needing money for a home when they really want money for an investment property." She was quiet for a moment, and I hoped maybe she was finally understanding how her behavior had affected me. But when she spoke again, I realized she was just regrouping. "Look, Mom," she said in her reasonable, businesslike voice, "I'm sorry if you feel deceived. That wasn't my intention. But the truth is, you wouldn't have understood the business aspects of the purchase anyway. I simplified the explanation to make it easier for you to understand." The condescension was back, the assumption that I was too old and stupid to understand her sophisticated financial dealings. But this time, instead of making me feel small and inadequate, it made me angry. "Jessica," I said, standing up from my chair, "I managed a household budget for 50 years. I raised 2 children on a secretary's salary. I put you through college by working 2 jobs and managing every dollar we earned. Don't you dare tell me I wouldn't understand a real estate transaction." She looked startled by the steel in my voice, probably because she had never heard me speak to her that way before. "I understand perfectly what you did," I continued. "You used my love for you to fund a business venture that you and David are profiting from. You lied to me about your intentions because you knew I wouldn't give you money to make yourself richer when I was making myself poorer. And now you're trying to make me feel stupid for being upset about being deceived." "Mom," she said. But I held up my hand to stop her. "I'm not finished," I said. "Here's what's going to happen from now on. If you want a relationship with me, it's going to be based on mutual respect and honesty. You're not going to lie to me, dismiss me, or treat me like I'm too old to understand your life. You're not going to ask me for money, period. And you're not going to squeeze me into your schedule like an inconvenient obligation." Jessica's face was cycling through emotions: surprise, anger, calculation. "What are you saying, Mom?" "I'm saying that I love you too much to continue enabling you to treat me badly. I'm saying that if you can't respect me as a person, then we can't have a relationship at all." The ultimatum hung in the air between us like a challenge. I had never spoken to any of my children this way, had never demanded that they treat me with respect or suffer consequences. Part of me was terrified that she would call my bluff and walk away forever. But a bigger part of me knew that the relationship we had been having wasn't worth preserving if it couldn't be transformed into something healthier. Jessica stood up, her face flushed with anger. "You know what, Mom? You're being completely unreasonable. I've been nothing but successful and responsible with my life, and instead of being proud of me, you're nitpicking about details that don't matter. Maybe you're right that we need some space from each other." She headed toward the door, then turned back to face me one more time. "And maybe while you're thinking about respect, you should think about how ungrateful you're being. How many mothers get to see their children become as successful as I have? How many mothers get to feel proud that they helped make that success possible?" Then she was gone, leaving me standing in my living room feeling like I had just jumped off a cliff without knowing whether there was water or rocks at the bottom. But strangely, along with the fear and sadness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pride in myself. I had finally stood up for my own dignity. I had finally demanded to be treated with the respect I deserved. And I had done it calmly, clearly, and with love, even in the face of Jessica's anger and manipulation. Mrs. Delgado knocked on my door about an hour later. She took one look at my face and went to put the kettle on for tea. "How did it go?" she asked gently. I told her about the conversation, about Jessica's reaction, about the mixture of relief and terror I was feeling. "You did the right thing, Margaret," she said firmly. "It's scary, but you did the right thing. Now you wait and see if she loves you enough to change, or if she only loves what you can do for her." Over the next few weeks, I waited. I didn't call Jessica, didn't try to smooth things over or walk back what I had said. For the first time in our relationship, I made her be the one to decide whether we would have contact. Miguel called me during this period, clearly having heard from Jessica about our confrontation. "Mom," he said carefully, "Jessica says you two had some kind of fight about money. Don't you think you should work things out? She's your daughter." I explained to Miguel what had happened: the lies about the apartment, the deception about how my money was being used. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. "I had no idea," he finally said. "I mean, I knew Jessica was always good at getting money from people, but I didn't know she was actually lying about what she needed it for." "Miguel," I said, "I need to ask you something. Do you see me as a person with my own needs and feelings? Or do you see me as just your mother, someone who exists to help you and support you?" He was quiet again, thinking about the question. "Mom," he said finally, "I think I've taken you for granted. I think we both have." That conversation with Miguel was different from the one with Jessica. He listened, he acknowledged my feelings, and he didn't try to defend behavior that couldn't be defended. It gave me hope that at least one of my children might be willing to work toward a healthier relationship. But from Jessica, there was only silence. 6 weeks after our confrontation, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible to me a year earlier. I was going to take a trip, not to visit family or fulfill some obligation, but just for myself, just for the joy of seeing somewhere new and having an adventure. I had never traveled alone in my life. I had taken a few trips with Roberto over the years, visits to Puerto Rico to see family, a weekend in Atlantic City for our anniversary. But I had never gone anywhere by myself, for my own pleasure, spending money on my own happiness rather than saving it for my children's needs. I booked a week-long trip to Washington, D.C., something I could afford with the small amount of money I had managed to save from my Social Security over the past few months. I had always wanted to see the Smithsonian museums, to walk around the monuments and learn about American history in the places where it had actually happened. Mrs. Delgado was delighted when I told her about my plans. "It's about time, Margaret," she said, clapping her hands together. "You're going to have a wonderful time." Miguel was supportive too, though he seemed a little surprised that I was doing something so independent. "Do you want me to come with you, Mom?" he asked. "I could take a long weekend and drive you down there." "No, mijo," I said, using the endearment that still came naturally with him. "This is something I want to do by myself." The morning of my departure, I woke up feeling nervous and excited in equal measure. I had packed carefully, trying to balance being prepared with traveling light. I had my guidebooks, my comfortable walking shoes, and my camera to take pictures for myself, not to show to anyone else, but to remember my adventure. As I was waiting for the taxi to take me to Penn Station to catch the train to Washington, my phone rang. It was Jessica. "Mom," she said, and her voice sounded different, less sure of itself than usual. "Miguel told me you're taking a trip today." "Yes," I said carefully. "I'm going to Washington for a week." "Alone?" she asked, and I could hear something like concern in her voice. "Alone," I confirmed. There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about respect and honesty and everything, and I think maybe I owe you an apology." My heart started beating faster, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "What kind of apology, Jessica?" "A real one," she said. "I lied to you about the apartment. I used your love for me to get money that I didn't really need, at least not the way I told you I needed it. And I've been treating you like you're not smart enough to understand my life when the truth is, I was the one who was being dishonest." I gripped the phone tighter, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. "I don't know if I can fix things between us," she continued, "but I want to try. I want to learn how to have a relationship with you that's based on more than just you giving me things. I want to learn how to be a daughter, instead of just someone who shows up when she needs something." The taxi was pulling up outside my building, but I couldn't move. This was the conversation I had been hoping for, the acknowledgement I had needed, the first sign that maybe Jessica could learn to love me as a person, rather than just use me as a resource. "Jessica," I said, my voice shaky with emotion, "that means more to me than you could ever know. Are you still going on your trip?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "but maybe when I get back we could have dinner? Not a rushed visit between other obligations, but a real dinner where we talk and spend time together?" "I'd like that, Mom," she said, and for the first time in months, she sounded like my daughter again, instead of a stranger. The train ride to Washington, D.C. was the most peaceful journey I had taken in decades. I sat by the window watching the landscape roll by, feeling like I was finally moving toward something positive instead of just enduring whatever came my way. That week in Washington was a revelation. I walked through the museums at my own pace, reading every plaque that interested me, sitting down when I was tired, spending as much time as I wanted in front of exhibits that caught my attention. I visited the Lincoln Memorial and the Vietnam War Memorial. I took a tour of the Capitol building. I ate meals in restaurants by myself without feeling lonely or self-conscious. Most importantly, I started to remember who I was as a person beyond being someone's mother. I had interests, opinions, curiosity about the world. I had survived immigration, poverty, discrimination, widowhood, and the challenge of raising children in a country that was not my birthplace. I was strong, resourceful, intelligent, and worthy of respect. On my last day in Washington, I was sitting in a cafe near Union Station, writing postcards to Mrs. Delgado and Miguel, when my phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica. "Mom, I hope you're having a wonderful trip. I've been doing a lot of thinking while you've been away. I opened a separate bank account and deposited money to start paying you back for the apartment. It's going to take time, but I want to make this right. I love you, and I'm sorry for forgetting how to show that properly." I sat in that cafe and cried tears of joy and relief, not because of the money, though it would help me feel more secure, but because my daughter was finally learning to see me as a whole person, deserving of honesty and respect. The train ride home was different from the ride there. I was no longer running away from my problems or trying to escape my disappointment. I was returning to a life that I had finally learned to value and protect, to relationships that I was no longer willing to accept on terms that diminished me. When I walked into my apartment building, Mrs. Delgado was waiting in the lobby with a huge smile and a plate of cookies. "How was your adventure?" she asked, and I could see in her eyes that she already knew the answer from the way I was standing. The confidence in my posture, the peace on my face. It was perfect, I told her. And I'm already planning the next one. Over the following months, my relationship with Jessica slowly began to change. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks and difficult conversations. But she started calling me just to talk, not because she needed something. She invited me to have lunch with her and David, introducing me as someone she was proud of, rather than someone she was obligated to. She began asking about my life, my health, my friendships, my interests. And true to her word, she started paying me back for the apartment money, not because I demanded it, but because she said it was important to her to make amends for taking advantage of my generosity. Miguel's relationship with me improved too, though it had never been as damaged as Jessica's. He started including me more in his family's activities, inviting me to his children's school plays and soccer games. His wife, who had always been polite but distant, began to warm up to me as she saw that I was no longer the demanding, needy mother-in-law she had been afraid I might become. But the most important relationship that improved was the one I had with myself. I learned to say no when requests didn't feel right to me. I learned to make plans for my own happiness instead of always waiting to see what my children might need from me. I learned to value my own opinions, my own interests, my own right to be treated with dignity and respect. I took more trips. I joined a book club at the community center. I volunteered at a local elementary school, helping children with reading. I started taking a ceramics class, working with clay in ways that reminded me of the satisfaction I had once found in cooking and creating things with my own hands. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that what had happened with Jessica wasn't really about money at all. It was about power, respect, and the dynamics that develop in families when love becomes confused with obligation and sacrifice becomes confused with weakness. She taught me that healthy relationships require boundaries, that children need to see their parents as people with their own needs and limits, and that love without respect isn't really love at all. But perhaps most importantly, she helped me understand that it's never too late to change these patterns. Even at 72 years old, even after decades of being taken for granted, I could learn to demand better treatment and to offer love in healthier ways. A year after that confrontation in my living room, Jessica and I had dinner at a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, somewhere between her world and mine. We talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing, about her work and my volunteer activities, about books we had read, and places we wanted to travel. At the end of the evening, as we were waiting for our separate taxis, she said something that made all the pain and struggle of the past year worth it. "Mom," she said, taking my hand, "I'm proud to be your daughter. Not because of what you've given me or what you've done for me, but because of who you are as a person. You're brave and strong and intelligent, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." I squeezed her hand and smiled. "It took me a long time to see it too, Mija." As I sit here now in my small apartment in the Bronx, watching the sunset over the Manhattan skyline where my daughter lives her successful life, I think about the journey I've taken over the past 2 years. From a woman who sold her jewelry to buy her daughter an apartment, to a woman who learned to value herself enough to demand respect from the people she loves. The empty jewelry box still sits on my dresser, but it doesn't represent loss anymore. It represents liberation. It represents the moment I stopped trying to buy love and started requiring it to be given freely. My daughter visits me now, not because she needs something, but because she enjoys my company. My son calls me regularly and includes me in his family's life in meaningful ways. Mrs. Delgado and I have become genuine friends, supporting each other through the challenges and joys of aging. But most importantly, I like the person I see when I look in the mirror now. I see someone worthy of respect, someone capable of growth and change, someone who learned that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. The jewelry is gone, but I found something more valuable, my own sense of worth. The apartment money was lost, but I gained something precious, the knowledge that I deserve to be treated with honesty and respect by the people I love. And every morning when I wake up in this small apartment with its faded wallpaper and clanging radiator, I feel grateful, not because my sacrifices were appreciated, but because I finally learned to stop sacrificing my own dignity for other people's comfort. At 74 years old, I am finally learning how to be Margaret Rodriguez, not just Jessica's mother, or Miguel's mother, or Roberto's widow, but Margaret, a whole person worthy of love just as she is. I share this story with you today because I know I'm not the only person who has confused love with sacrifice, who has mistaken being needed for being valued. If you recognize yourself in my story, if you've ever wondered whether you're being taken advantage of by the people you love most, I want you to know that it's not too late to change these patterns. You deserve to be treated with respect by your children, regardless of how much you've sacrificed for them. You deserve honesty in your relationships, even when the truth is complicated. You deserve to have your own needs and interests and opinions valued by the people who claim to love you. And you deserve to know that your worth as a person doesn't depend on what you can give to others, but on who you are as a human being deserving of dignity and care. The hardest lesson I learned is that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop enabling people to treat you badly. Sometimes teaching people to respect you requires you to be willing to lose relationships that aren't healthy. And sometimes the people who love you most need you to insist on better treatment in order to learn how to love you properly. My relationship with Jessica is better now than it's ever been, not because I gave her more, but because I finally required her to give something back: respect, honesty, and genuine care for my well-being. If you're living in a relationship where love only flows in one direction, where your sacrifices are taken for granted, where your needs are dismissed as unimportant, I encourage you to find the courage to speak up for yourself. It won't be easy, and it might get worse before it gets better. But the alternative is spending whatever time you have left feeling unvalued and unappreciated by the people you love most. You deserve better than that. We all do. Have you ever found yourself in a situation like mine? Have you ever wondered if you're being taken for granted by the people you love most? Let me know in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our stories helps us realize we're not alone in these struggles. And if this story resonated with you, if it helped you see your own relationships more clearly, or gave you courage to demand better treatment, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these honest conversations about family, love, and the courage to value ourselves even when it's difficult. Because sometimes the most important journey we can take is the one that leads us back to our own sense of worth.